arthritis is getting more and more common. In fact, most people will get arthritis at some point in their life. What's alarming, though, is that even after being diagnosed, 1 in 5 people don't know which of the 2 types of arthritis they actually have. And understanding the difference changes everything, including what to eat. The word arthritis means arthros, which is joint, and itis, which is inflammation. So an inflamed joint. And there's 2 different types. The most aggressive is called rheumatoid arthritis, or RA, and it's a state of very high intense burning inflammation. It's acute, it's systemic, and most importantly is driven by your immune system. Your immune system creates different inflammatory markers called TNF-alpha, interleukin-1, interleukin-6 to signal inflammation. We call that a cytokine storm, a signaling storm. And this attacks the joint capsule of the joint. That's what's unique about this rheumatoid arthritis. So if we take a look at this knee joint, you can see the surrounding layer here is the capsule, and inside is what's called synovial fluid. Those are fluids that disperse nutrients and transmit nutrients and resources inside because we don't have blood supply there. But you can see how inflamed and angry that inside is, which we get with rheumatoid arthritis. And RA is called an erosive arthritis, which means it erodes the bone ends and the cartilage over time. So one of the classic signs of rheumatoid arthritis is this breakdown of bone where you start getting an angle to the fingers. This is called an ulnar deviation, where it veers off to the pinky side of the hand. And also, what's important to understand for the purpose of this video is that it's treated with immune suppression, meaning if your immune system attacks you, then let's attack the immune system is the philosophy. Let's suppress the immune system so it can't have as much energy in attacking you. But in doing that, they lessen some of your symptoms, but they also lessen your immune system. And you have that immune system for a reason. The other kind, which is way more common, is called osteoarthritis, also abbreviated OA. And this is similar in that it has inflammation, but it's driven by poor metabolic health. And also this state of inflammation is low-grade, chronic, and local. It's not as widespread and systemic as with the rheumatoid. So poor metabolic health, also known as insulin resistance, is going to drive up your blood sugar. And when you have more sugar in your bloodstream and it combines with proteins, that's called glycation. And these are called advanced glycation end products. They do all sorts of damage in the body. But when it comes to joints and cartilage, they stiffen and degrade, break down, weaken that cartilage. And then if we combine that with uneven wear and tear from poor posture or uncorrected imbalances, now what happens is we get more breakdown than we get buildup. So it's not like you're born with a set of joints and they last all your life. They're constantly remodeling, they're breaking down and rebuilding. And in a healthy person, that keeps up. So we're always having healthy joints. But when these problems start setting in, that we're talking about now, the breakdown is more than the rebuilding, and we start breaking down that joint. But then when the cartilage thins, the body does something to compensate. It starts building up bones at the margin of the joint. So in an osteoarthritic knee, it can look like this, where we see in the middle we have the discs are thinning out, and when they get completely worn away, we can have bone on bone, and that's when you get your knee replacement. But what you see over at the edges on the margin of the joint is the body is compensating by depositing additional pieces of bone looking like little nodules. Another common place we see this is in the hand, where you see a thickening of the knuckles. It's like they have a little rounding to them, and on some of them you can see these little nodules up at the distal end of the joint. And osteoarthritis is treated with regular systemic anti-inflammatories that can be pretty harsh on your digestive tract. And then here's some pictures just to compare. So you see what normal looks like, where we have this blue, in this picture, blue, cushy, thick cartilage to act as a padding and also to guide the joints through its proper motion. We see the hand with straight fingers and no extra nodules. And we already talked about the others. So here's why food matters. Because rheumatoid arthritis is autoimmune in origin and osteoarthritis is metabolic in origin, but they're both inflammatory, even though they're different degrees. And the foods that we choose to eat can either fuel the fire or they can calm down the fire. And we need to understand why that's better in many cases than medication. Because medication addresses symptoms only, not the root cause. So medications are good in the sense that they can help you feel comfortable while you're combating this, while you're changing some things. But if you just take the medication and don't change anything, now you're allowing the disease to progress and get worse. So I'm going to talk about three different groups of foods. And the first one is called the sugar and the carb group. And we start off with number one, sugar and high fructose corn syrup. And when we eat these foods, they're very simple carbs. They will increase blood sugar. We get blood sugar spikes. And what happens now in rheumatoid arthritis is these blood sugar spikes will drive these messengers, these cytokines, and we will increase our risks of arthritic flare-ups. In osteoarthritis, we have the problem of advanced glycation end products. And the higher the blood sugar we have, the more sugar there is to combine with the proteins. And then these agents, like we said, they stiffen and degrade the cartilage. And most people know by now that sugar is not a good thing. But a lot of people still hold on to the idea that carbs are okay. Even if they're refined, they're often told that they're complex because they're starches. So things like white bread and rice and crackers and cereal, people still think they're very different from sugar. But in fact, many of these will have the same or even higher glycemic index than sugar, meaning they create more and bigger blood sugar spikes. They even than sugar does. And even if we're only spending a minute on this slide, this is the most important driver of metabolic disease and of osteoarthritis, and even in aggravating the problems for rheumatoid arthritis. Then we have a group that we call high heat and bad fats. So when we cook food, we also change their properties. And we'll start with industrial seed oils to really understand what's going on here. They're high in omega-6 fatty acids, and they break down into arachidonic acid, which drives another signaling molecule called PGE2, stands for prostaglandin E2. So we have a prostaglandin 1 and a 2 and a 3, which are the most common ones. And the 2 is the one that is pro-inflammatory. And this is the mechanism by which omega-6s are pro-inflammatory in excess. Okay, if we have a balance of omega-6, omega-3, and we have a balance of these prostaglandin, now we have balance. But most people get way too much, oftentimes 20, 30 times more omega-6 than they should. The second problem is that these polyunsaturated fatty acids, they have multiple double bonds in them, and these are very, very sensitive to reaction, and they're sensitive to break. And when they do, from heat and oxygen now, they create byproducts that are toxic, called aldehydes. So when they make these oil, they expose them to extreme heat and they produce a lot of aldehydes. So they have to clean them up. They taste and smell horrible, and you could not consume them at all unless they deodorize them, which is another chemical process to remove the aldehydes. And this is why we end up with a completely tasteless and odorless oil. Now the problem though is that this process also removes anything else in there that was natural, that was put there by nature to protect the oil, such as antioxidants called tocopherols and polyphenols. Now they would prevent the oxidation. They're naturally there, but the deodorization removes all of that. So now we end up with two problems. We have the arachidonic acid from the omega-6s that directly drives rheumatoid arthritis flare-ups, but also because they removed anything that's going to protect the oil is defenseless. So as soon as we heat it, it's very, very easy to oxidize it and damage it and start creating these aldehydes. And this brings us into fried food, which is using the same oil that we just talked about on the other slide, except now we start heating it extremely high temperatures over and over. So these multiple bonds, the polyunsaturated bonds, they're sensitive to heat and then they break, and now we produce these toxic aldehydes. And now just like sugar can stick to protein to make an age, we can have these aldehydes stick to protein and make something similar, but will an LALE. And this stands for Advanced Lip Oxidation End Product. So a few letters different, but it basically works the same way. It does damage just like the ages. So for rheumatoid arthritis, we now get an increase in inflammation and these rheumatoid arthritis flare-ups. And for osteoarthritis, we get the cartilage damage just like with the ages. And one more way that we can cook food is through dry heat, like grilling, charring, open flame, smoking food, etc. And now we get more acronyms. Don't worry about all the letters. We get something called HCAS, heterocyclic amines, that can do some damage. Here's a trick though. If you marinate it with some things to offset, like herbs are antioxidants. So most of the leafy green herbs like basil and thyme, etc., and also something acid, you can offset this. So vinegar or lemon or lime are excellent acids, and you can reduce it as much as 90% and basically get rid of almost all of these heterocyclic amines, and garlic and ginger are excellent as well. And then one more thing you can do is to watch the fat dripping. So if you have huge chunks of fat, if you're grilling a ribeye or something, and that fat melts and drips, now you create smoke. That's going to make one more chemical called pH, which stands for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So what you can do here is you trim off the really big pieces so that there's less fat dripping, and then you just watch it to avoid some of those flare-ups. Just realize that when we cook it and we brown it now, we make some changes to it. And we'll talk in a little bit about how serious that is. In addition to this, the browning and the heat is also creating more of these AGEs, the advanced glycation end products. Now, there's some people now that confuse the issues and they say that the red meat is bad because of this, or they tell us that we should never grill anything. But let's talk a little bit more about AGEs and this browning process, because it's not as straightforward as some people would make it. So first of all, there are endogenous, meaning made inside the body, and those are the ones that we make from blood sugar and protein. So when our blood sugar is high, when we're insulin resistant now, they combine to make AGEs. This phenomenon is directly tied to insulin resistant, and it's proportional to the amount of insulin resistance. And then there is the exogenous. This is from whatever we bring in through food, from cooking, and from our choice of foods. But here's the thing to realize. Just because you cook it and brown it and put it in your mouth doesn't mean that it ends up in the tissues, which endogenous, they're pretty much guaranteed. They're made inside the system. So they're going to be in there. When we eat them, only about 10% of it actually gets absorbed. And then the research is quite mixed on how much of it ends up in the tissues and if this actually does any damage. So they've done studies where they have reduced the amount of dietary AGEs. Like they don't grill anything. They don't eat anything that has any AGEs in it, but they still weren't able to bring down the total amount of AGEs in the body. So we need to realize that our level of blood sugar, blood glucose, is a much bigger lever in this problem than the grill. And this is by a wide margin. So you could, if you have a little bit of high blood sugar, that is much worse than eating every meal every day off the grill. So I'm not saying that you should necessarily eat every meal off the grill, but I'm also not saying that you should freak out about it. The most important thing you can do is to watch your blood sugar. And then we have the gut and the biome group. And these are all the different ways that affect our inflammation, that affects immunity through our gut function. And realize we can get systemic low-grade inflammation through the gut for osteoarthritis. But most autoimmunity, like rheumatoid arthritis, is also coming from the gut. So number 6 is alcohol. It damages the gut lining directly. It increases the intestinal permeability, making it a little bit more leaky. And now what happens is you have some pathogenic bacteria. They make byproducts that are toxic called lipopolysaccharides. And now when they leak into the bloodstream, your body goes crazy. It really doesn't like that. It sets it on fire, and you get a systemic immune response to those toxins. So for rheumatoid arthritis, alcohol is a documented flare trigger. It triggers flare-ups more commonly. And for osteoarthritis, it's going to add to the systemic inflammation load. So we increase the overall low-grade fire in the body. Food number 7 is gluten, which everyone has heard now is a bad thing. And it may or may not be. I'm not a fan of gluten, but we need to realize it works on a sensitivity mechanism. It will loosen the gut barrier. It'll make it more permeable in some people. And if it does that, then larger particles of food can cross into the bloodstream and create allergies, sensitivity reactions. And the evidence for this is very real, but it's not 100%, which almost nothing is, because every time we do a study, we get different outcomes. So with rheumatoid arthritis, this can be a flare trigger for some people. Again, some people, and same thing for osteoarthritis. It may add to that inflammatory load. The thing to realize about gluten, though, is that it's not as black and white as with celiacs or non-celiacs. That there's a lot of people who have smaller kind of gray area sensitivities to gluten without realizing it. So this is one of those things that if you think it may be a problem, cut it out and see if it makes a difference. Food number 8 is nightshades. And these are things like tomatoes and eggplants or famous nightshades. And for some people, this can be a problem because they contain something called lectin. And this is the plant's defense system. It's a protein that is slightly toxic and that helps the plant from getting eaten. However, if you have a healthy gut with a strong barrier, with a good mucus layer and healthy bacteria, the lectins are going to get broken down before they ever reach any of your tissues, before they ever start causing any problems. So in other words, the people who have problems with nightshades and lectins are those who have a compromised gut where they don't have the barrier and the mucus and the bacteria. So now the lectin does not get broken down and it starts binding to the gut wall and again creating reactions and inflammation. So when it comes to a lot of these different foods, especially plant foods, it is more about the health and quality of your biome of the system down there than it is about the actual food. So for both RA and OA, if you have a leaky gut, if you have some compromise, then yes, that can lead to reactions and flare-ups and increased inflammation. So again, give it a try. If you see a huge difference, then you know that that was a problem, and now you can either avoid those foods or you could try to fix your gut. Food number 9 are emulsifiers, and they are in virtually all processed foods. They help the consistency. They help the blending of the food to be more uniform and smoother. But in doing that, they damage tissues, so they hurt the thin protective mucus layer in the gut. They kind of eat away at that. And they can also alter the balance of the bacteria in your gut, so the composition of your microbiome. So in doing that, they will increase the permeability and the amount of circulating LPSs, lipopolysaccharides, the bacterial toxin. And the mechanism they have in common with many of the other things that we talked about. One thing they have found, though, that's key is it reduces one of the key protective bacteria that maintain the mucus layer, which is called Akkermansia. So with rheumatoid arthritis, especially with leaky gut, but it can also help produce leaky gut and increased LPSs. Now you will have increased frequency of flare-ups. And with the osteoarthritis, it's the same mechanism, but now it just leads to more overall inflammation. And number 10 is artificial sweeteners, the popular ones being saccharin and sucralose and aspartame and acylfame potassium. At first, they were, of course, promoted as the healthy alternative to sugar. But as we learn more and more, we also realize that just about anything that is man-made is going to have some downside. So now we know that they directly alter the gut microcomposition. They change the balance of bacteria. And they've done multiple studies where they've proven that this happens through fecal transplant studies. Now it will reduce the protective bacteria, and they will impair the gut barrier again, more leaky gut. So with rheumatoid arthritis, they will increase the gut-driven systemic inflammation. And with osteoarthritis, it's the same mechanism, but again, just more general inflammation. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.